This is a presentation for parents who might have some questions or some concerns about their child's school beginning to utilize the RTI process or framework. RTI is response to intervention, and it is essentially a process used to help all students throughout the school. Let's look at what RTI is. RTI is essentially a three-tiered approach to recognizing the early signs of struggling learners. This is often done through progress monitoring and data collecting, amongst some other things, and we'll discuss those throughout this presentation. RTI is also done through small group interventions, and the ultimate goal is to meet each individual child's needs by using research-based materials, curriculums, and teaching methods. Who benefits from RTI? Well, the answer really is that all students are going to benefit. As mentioned in the first slide, utilizing this framework requires the schools to use research-based curriculum. And that's not just in the small group interventions for the RTI process. It is the research-based curriculum that is being used throughout each subject for every classroom, whether it's whole group learning and instruction or the small group intervention. Also mentioned in the first slide was one of the biggest benefits of RTI, and that is this early identification of students who might be struggling. And I'm going to talk about the process of that early identification, and you'll understand why that is so important as we go through this presentation. All right, let's look at exactly what RTI looks like. Right here, you're going to see the three-tiered RTI model. It looks like a triangle with Tier 1 on the bottom. Tier 1 is the biggest group of students, and these students have been identified as, for the most part, being on grade level, working on grade level, and they're the least likely to fall behind or begin struggling. Then we go up to Tier 2. This group is a little bit smaller than Tier 1, and it has students that might be a little lagging a little behind grade level in their peers, but through the RTI interventions, they are making slow but steady progress. And then at the top, we have the smallest group. It's Tier 3, and these students are identified as being 1 or possibly 2 or more years behind grade level. They're going to need more interventions and more progress monitoring, and we'll talk about all of those later in the presentation as well. But the biggest thing I want to point out is that all students are going to be benefiting no matter what tier they're in, because a school using the RTI model is having to use that research-based curriculum, and that curriculum has been studied and proven to help students progress the best way possible. All right, let's look at how students are placed into one of these three tiers. Beginning of the year testing or screening is going to be done on every student. It's going to help the teachers to identify grade level readiness for each student. They're going to use these screenings along with possibly other documentation from previous years to determine which level or which tier each student needs to be in. All right, let's look at how RTI works. First of all, a team is going to be assembled made up of school administrators and teachers. And this team is going to use the documentation that teachers are giving them to make a plan for each individual student. And this plan is going to help these students progress in the best way possible the quickest. All right, so I've mentioned intervention quite a bit. That's a big component of RTI, one of the biggest pieces. And intervention is basically just a term that's being used when teachers are working with small groups of students on targeted skills. So these students that are in tiers 2 and tiers 3 are the ones identified as the most struggling. And these small groups are going to be a set aside time of the day where these individual groups are going to work with their teachers on the skills that they are falling behind in or lacking. And so this intervention component is one of the biggest components in this model. The students that are in tier 1, that biggest group, are usually going to go with a paraprofessional or an extracurricular teacher to do some enrichment type activities to build on what they already have accomplished. All right, I've mentioned quite a bit the data. Data is important in the RTI model because it is what is reported back to the RTI team to make the decisions that need to be made for each individual student. Data is going to be that beginning of the year screening. It's going to be progress monitoring throughout the year, and it's going to allow this team to make a professional decision instead of an individual teacher making a decision on a student. All right. Student success is the ultimate goal. And if that's our goal, we've got to have this progress monitoring component. This progress monitoring component is going to be watching students closely, especially the students that are in tier 2 and tier 3, to see if they're progressing throughout the year. It's going to happen usually every week, maybe every 2 weeks, depending on concepts being taught. And the teachers doing the small group interventions are going to assess what they've been teaching over the previous week or two, how well the students have retained that information or mastered that information, and that's going to be turned over to the RTI team. So basically, this is just a revolving method throughout the year, trying to decide how students are progressing. If there's no progression, then plans are going to be changed, and that RTI team is going to have a big picture of the data throughout the year to make the best decision on what plan needs to be changed. Also, if students have been progressing better than expected, maybe they were in tier 2 and they're really doing well and they can be moved down to tier 3, moved down to tier 1, then that is something that can be made through this progress monitoring tool as well. All right, some parents have concerns of their students who have learning disabilities aren't going to be getting the benefit that they usually would get if their school wasn't doing RTI. And that is just a misconception, I would have to say, because students with learning disabilities are going to get the benefit of their IEP through the special education program, as well as getting the benefit of all these extra progress monitorings and small group interventions through the RTI process. So they're really getting the best of both worlds. And if you would like more information, I have the references that I use to